on my desk on a Tuesday. Alexandra Catherine Morrison, reckless driving. There are moments in 40 years on this bench that stay with you forever. Moments that make you question whether we're raising a generation that confuses intelligence with arrogance, education with wisdom, vocabulary with character. Let me tell you about one of those moments, about a young woman who walked into my courtroom, convinced that knowing the law meant she was above it, who thought legal terminology was a shield against accountability, who believed her father's reputation as a prominent attorney made her untouchable. Her name was Alexandra Morrison, 24 years old, recent law school graduate, daughter of Rhode Island defense attorney Jonathan Morrison, and she was about to learn that in my courtroom, it doesn't matter how many Latin phrases you know or how eloquently you can cite case law. What matters is whether you took responsibility when you hurt someone. The file landed on my desk on a Tuesday. Alexandra Catherine Morrison, reckless driving causing injury, leaving the scene of an accident, obstruction of justice. The victim's name made my hands shake. Margaret Sullivan, age 72. Detective Rodriguez brought me the details. Margaret Sullivan was a retired librarian who'd spent 40 years at Providence Public Library helping children learn to read. She lived on Social Security, walked everywhere, and volunteered 3 days a week teaching immigrants English. She was crossing Hope Street in a marked crosswalk with a walk signal when Alexandra Morrison came speeding through at 55 miles per hour in a 35 zone, texting about some case her father was arguing. The impact threw Margaret Sullivan 15 feet. Her right hip was shattered, left arm broken in 2 places, 3 ribs fractured, severe concussion, internal bleeding requiring emergency surgery. Alexandra Morrison never touched her brakes. The forensic analysis showed she was doing 55 when she hit Margaret, and she actually accelerated to 60 after impact, fleeing while an elderly woman lay broken on the pavement. But what made this case disturbing wasn't just the crime. It was what Alexandra did afterward. She called her father immediately, before calling 911, before checking if Margaret was alive, before anything a decent human would do. And Jonathan Morrison went into full defense mode. Within an hour, he had 3 associates at the scene, taking photographs, interviewing witnesses, building defense strategy, while Margaret Sullivan was in surgery, fighting for her life. Phone records showed Jonathan calling in favors, asking about procedural vulnerabilities and evidentiary challenges. Text messages between father and daughter where he coached her on exactly what to say to police. But the recording that made me lose sleep was Alexandra at the police station, 72 hours after the accident, giving her statement with her father's legal team surrounding her. Detective Rodriguez played it for me. Alexandra's voice was calm, measured, clinical. No emotion, no remorse, just calculated legal strategy. Detective, I want to establish for the record that I was proceeding through an intersection where visibility was compromised by parked vehicles. Under Rhode Island General Law 31184, a driver is not liable for unavoidable accidents where reasonable care has been exercised. She wasn't describing hitting a 72-year-old woman. She was reciting defensive legal theory like a law school exam. Detective Rodriguez testified about his frustration trying to get a human statement. Miss Morrison, did you see Mrs. Sullivan in the crosswalk? Detective, the relevant question is whether reasonable perception was possible given environmental constraints. Did you stop after impact? Detective, I executed what I believe to be appropriate vehicular protocols given my assessment of incident severity. She couldn't even say I hit someone without hiding behind legal terminology. The morning Alexandra Morrison walked into my courtroom, it was Thursday, 10 a.m. sharp. She came wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than Margaret Sullivan's monthly Social Security check. Behind her walked her father, Jonathan Morrison, and 2 associates, carrying briefcases full of motions. What struck me was Alexandra's demeanor. She didn't walk in nervous or remorseful. She walked in like she was heading to a moot court competition, confident, analytical, detached. She looked around my courtroom like she was evaluating it for procedural compliance. Even the way she stood, shoulders back, chin up, legal pad in hand, communicated that she thought this was an intellectual exercise, not a reckoning. Alexandra Catherine Morrison, reckless driving, causing serious bodily injury, leaving the scene, obstruction of justice. She approached with her father, whispering last-minute strategy. Miss Morrison, you hit Margaret Sullivan in a crosswalk and drove away while she lay bleeding. Do you understand these charges? Your Honor, I understand the charges as articulated, though I believe there are significant factual and legal issues requiring clarification before proceeding to substantive matters. Factual and legal issues. Did you hit Mrs. Sullivan with your car? Your Honor, the police report alleges vehicular contact with a pedestrian, though the precise mechanics of that contact and contributory factors remain disputed. Did your car hit Mrs. Sullivan? Yes or no? Her father whispered something. She nodded. Your Honor, there was contact between my vehicle and the pedestrian. However, the relevant inquiry is whether that contact resulted from negligence on my part or whether it constituted an unavoidable accident under the doctrine you were going 55 in a 35 zone. Your Honor, the posted speed limit represents a statutory maximum, but actual reasonable speed varies based on traffic conditions. Under the reasonable person standard articulated in negligence law, you were texting while driving. Your Honor, I was engaged in electronic communication relevant to my father's legal practice, which constitutes work-related activity. The question of whether such communication rises to distracted driving requires analysis of Rhode Island case.
Listen closely here. This isn't testimony, it's a law school exam disguised as a human response. Notice what's missing. Fear. Regret. Empathy. Audience check. Would you feel hurt if this was how someone explained hurting you?
Case law. I held up my hand. This young woman was going to lecture me about law in my own courtroom. After you hit Mrs. Sullivan, why didn't you stop? Your Honor, I believed I had experienced a minor vehicular irregularity, possibly tire-related, and continued to my destination. This belief, whether ultimately accurate or not, negates mens rea for leaving the scene because you believed you hit a tire? Your Honor, in the absence of direct visual confirmation of pedestrian contact, and given ambiguous sensory input, my reasonable interpretation. Witnesses heard the impact from half a block away. Your Honor, auditory perception is notoriously unreliable, as established in State v. Richardson, and witness testimony regarding sound intensity without proper decibel measurement. Your car's front bumper was destroyed. You expect this court to believe you thought you hit a tire? Her father whispered urgently. She nodded. Your Honor, with hindsight, my initial assessment may have been incomplete. However, the legal standard for leaving the scene requires knowing and willful conduct, and my subjective belief at the time, this young woman couldn't or wouldn't speak like a normal human. Every sentence was a legal argument. Every answer was case law. Every response was strategic positioning. She'd been so trained by her father to never admit anything that she'd lost the ability to simply tell the truth. If you're watching this and thinking about law school, subscribe to Judge Stories YT right now, because what happens next will show you the difference between knowing law and understanding justice. Mrs. Sullivan spent 2 weeks in intensive care. Her hip was shattered. She'll never walk without assistance again. What do you have to say? Your Honor, while I sympathize with Mrs. Sullivan's medical condition, the question of proximate causation between the alleged incident and her injuries requires expert medical testimony. You sympathize? Your Honor, I acknowledge that Mrs. Sullivan has experienced unfortunate medical complications. However, establishing legal liability requires demonstrating that those complications directly resulted from actions that violated a duty of care. Do you feel any remorse for what happened to Mrs. Sullivan? She paused, looked at her father. He shook his head. Your Honor, I don't believe that's a relevant legal question. The issue before this court is whether evidence establishes beyond reasonable doubt that I committed the charged offenses, not my emotional state. Your Honor, her father stood. I object to this line of questioning. My daughter's feelings are not at issue. The only relevant questions concern the elements. Mr. Morrison, sit down. I'm asking your daughter if she feels human remorse for nearly killing a 72-year-old woman. Alexandra looked at me with clinical detachment. Your Honor, expressing emotion without full legal context could be construed as admission of liability, which would prejudice my rights in potential civil proceedings. Therefore, on advice of counsel, you're refusing to express remorse because it might hurt you in a lawsuit? Your Honor, I'm exercising my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The Fifth Amendment protects you from incriminating yourself. It doesn't protect you from showing basic human decency. I stood up from my bench. Let me show you what real law looks like. Bailiff, play the security footage. The monitor displayed traffic camera footage. Margaret Sullivan appeared on screen, a small elderly woman with white hair, carrying a canvas library bag. She waited for the walk signal. When it changed, she looked both ways carefully and began crossing. She was in the middle of the crosswalk, clearly visible, when Alexandra's BMW came speeding into frame. No brake lights, no slowing. The car struck Margaret Sullivan with sickening force. The elderly woman's body flew through the air. She landed 15 feet away and didn't move. Her library bag exploded, books scattering everywhere. Alexandra's BMW never slowed, just kept going, accelerating away while Margaret lay motionless. Then other people ran to help. A man taking off his jacket to cover her. A woman calling 911. Everyone trying to help except the person who hit her. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent except for quiet crying. I looked at Alexandra. Her face was pale, but her expression remained controlled. Clinical. That's you driving? Your Honor, the video appears to show a vehicle consistent with my BMW, though definitive identification would require expert analysis. It's your car. Your license plate is visible. Your Honor, I acknowledge the vehicle is registered to me. However, the question of operator identity. Miss Morrison, stop. Just stop talking like a lawyer for 1 second and talk like a human being. You hit a 72-year-old woman and drove away. Can you just say that? Can you just admit what you did without hiding behind legal terminology? She looked at her father. He whispered something. She shook her head. Your Honor, I decline to make statements that could be construed as admissions. Let's hear from Mrs. Sullivan. Margaret Sullivan came forward with a walker, each step clearly painful. She wore a simple dress and cardigan, her white hair neatly arranged. Despite everything, she had the dignified bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime helping others. Getting her seated took several minutes. The whole time, Alexandra watched with clinical detachment. Mrs. Sullivan, tell the court what happened that day. Margaret's voice was soft but steady. Your Honor, I was walking home from the library. I volunteer there on Tuesdays and Thursdays, helping children with reading. That day I'd worked with a little girl named Maria who was struggling with English. By the end, she read her first full book. I was so proud. She smiled at the memory, then became sad. I was carrying books I'd checked out. I love mysteries. I waited for the walk signal, like I always do. My mother taught me 70 years ago, always look both ways. I started crossing. Her voice caught. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. I couldn't move my right side. The pain was, I can't describe it. A doctor said my hip was shattered, that I'd need surgery, that I might never walk normally again. Several people were crying. I asked what happened. They said a car hit me and drove away, that someone else called the ambulance, that the driver never stopped. She looked at Alexandra. I've been thinking about that for weeks, trying to understand. How does someone hit another person and just drive away? How do you not stop? How do you not check if they're okay? Alexandra's expression didn't change. She was taking notes. Mrs. Sullivan, how has this affected your life? I can't volunteer at the library anymore. Can't stand long enough. Can't carry books. The children ask where I am. She wiped her eyes. I can't live independently. Had to move in with my niece because I can't manage stairs. I sold most of my belongings because there was no room, including my books. 40 years of collecting books, and I had to sell them. Her voice strengthened. But worse than the physical pain is knowing that the person who did this doesn't care. That she hit me and drove away like I was an animal. That she's never once tried to apologize. Has Miss Morrison contacted you? No, Your Honor. but her father's investigators came asking questions, trying to find things to use against me, like I'm the one on trial. She looked at Alexandra. I don't understand how someone becomes so cold, how you hide behind words instead of taking responsibility, how you can hurt someone and feel nothing. Looking at Miss Morrison now, is there anything you want to say to her? Margaret turned to face Alexandra. Miss Morrison, I was a librarian for 40 years. I taught thousands of children to read. I believe that education made people better. That knowledge led to wisdom. That learning helped you understand other people's humanity. Her voice broke. But looking at you, I see someone who learned all the words, but none of the meaning. Someone who knows the law, but not justice. Someone who can cite cases, but can't feel empathy. I feel sorry for you. Not angry, sorry. Because someday you'll be 72. Someday you'll be vulnerable, and you'll hope that if something bad happens, the person responsible will stop, will help, will care. And I hope they do. I hope they're better than you were to me. The courtroom was silent. Alexandra looked down at her legal pad and wrote something. She was taking notes on a 72-year-old woman's pain. Her father looked stricken. For the first time, Jonathan Morrison realized what he'd created. Like this video right now if you believe Margaret Sullivan deserves more than legal jargon. After Mrs. Sullivan's testimony, I addressed Alexandra again. You heard Mrs. Sullivan. She spent her life helping children learn to read. You destroyed her independence, her home, her work. What do you have to say? Alexandra stood, legal pad in hand. Your Honor, while I acknowledge Mrs. Sullivan's testimony regarding her medical condition, I must note that she admitted she's 72, which raises questions about pre-existing physical vulnerability that may have contributed to injury severity. Stop. Did you just argue that Mrs. Sullivan's age makes your crime less serious? Your Honor, I'm noting that proximate causation requires accounting for victim fragility under the eggshell skull doctrine. You're blaming a 72-year-old woman for breaking when you hit her? Your Honor, I'm applying established legal...
This is the moment every courtroom waits for, the truth without commentary. No objections. No statutes. No spin. Just video. Ask yourself, if you still can't say I'm sorry after this, what's left of your humanity?
Principles. Legal analysis requires humanity. It requires understanding that behind every case, citation is a real person with real pain. Alexandra looked confused. Her father stood. Your Honor, if I may, Mr. Morrison, sit down. You've done enough. You taught your daughter to hide behind legal terminology instead of taking responsibility. You coached her to never admit anything, never show remorse, never be vulnerable. And now she's treating a victim's testimony like evidence to be challenged rather than pain to be acknowledged. Jonathan Morrison looked like I'd slapped him. Your Honor, I taught my daughter to protect herself legally. You taught her to protect herself from being human. I turned back to Alexandra. Miss Morrison, I'm going to give you one more chance, not as a judge, as a human being. Can you look at Mrs. Sullivan and just say you're sorry? Not a legal statement, just 3 words. I am sorry. Alexandra looked at her father. He was shaking his head. She looked at her legal pad, at her notes. Then she looked at me and said, Your Honor, on advice of counsel and pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights, I decline to make any statement that could be construed as an admission of liability. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Even court officers looked disgusted. Margaret Sullivan was crying quietly. Not from anger, from sadness. Miss Morrison, you just chose legal strategy over human decency. You just chose protecting yourself from a lawsuit over apologizing to a woman whose life you destroyed. Let me show you what real law looks like. Alexandra Catherine Morrison, I find you guilty on all charges. Reckless driving, causing serious bodily injury, leaving the scene, obstruction of justice. Her face went white. Your sentence, 120 days in Providence County Correctional. License suspended 2 years. Full restitution to Mrs. Sullivan, $185,000. 500 hours community service at Providence Public Library, where you'll see the work Mrs. Sullivan can no longer do. Furthermore, before you can be admitted to the Rhode Island Bar, you will submit a written essay explaining what you learned about the difference between knowing law and understanding justice. Your sentence begins immediately. Bailiff, take Miss Morrison into custody. What? Alexandra's composure shattered. Your Honor, I'm a law school graduate. I'm supposed to take the bar exam next month. I can't go to jail. You should have thought about that before you hit Mrs. Sullivan and drove away. This is insane. My career, my future. I'm not a criminal. You are exactly a criminal. You hit an elderly woman and fled. Officer Martinez approached with handcuffs. Alexandra backed away. Daddy, do something. Jonathan Morrison stood. For a long moment, he looked at his daughter. Then at Margaret Sullivan. Then at me. Your Honor, my daughter's sentence is just. I won't be filing an appeal. Daddy, what are you? Alexandra, stop. Judge Caprio is right. I taught you all the wrong things. I taught you to never admit fault, never show vulnerability, never let anyone see your humanity. I thought I was protecting you, but I was destroying you. He looked at Margaret Sullivan with tears. Mrs. Sullivan, my daughter learned to hide behind legal terminology from me. I'm responsible for that, and I'm sorry. Alexandra was crying now. Daddy, please. Alexandra, you're going to serve this sentence every day. And when you get out, you're going to learn what it means to be a lawyer. Someone who uses law to help people, not hide from accountability. The handcuffs clicked. She was sobbing. As Officer Martinez led her toward the holding cell, Alexandra turned back. And finally, she spoke like a human being. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have stopped. I should have helped you. I'm sorry. Margaret Sullivan stood, slowly, painfully. Miss Morrison, I forgive you. I hope these 4 months teach you what law school didn't. That behind every case is a person. That justice requires heart, not just intelligence. That being smart means nothing if you're not also kind. Alexandra broke down completely as the door closed. Jonathan Morrison approached my bench. Your Honor, I need to say something publicly. He turned to address the courtroom. I'm Jonathan Morrison. I've practiced law in Rhode Island for 32 years. But my greatest failure is standing there in handcuffs. I taught my daughter to be brilliant, but not compassionate. Strategic, but not honest. Clever, but not kind. He looked at Margaret Sullivan. Mrs. Sullivan, my daughter hurt you, but I made her into someone capable of hurting you without feeling it. That's on me, and I'm sorry. Your Honor, I'm withdrawing from practice for 1 year. I need to relearn what it means to be a lawyer, to serve justice, not just manipulate law. He walked out a broken man, but maybe a better one. 3 months later, I got a letter from Alexandra Morrison, written by hand. Dear Judge Caprio, I've been thinking about Mrs. Sullivan's words, about learning all the words, but none of the meaning. She was right. I knew every legal term for what I did, but I'd never let myself think about what those words meant in reality, that they meant an elderly woman in pain, a life destroyed. I've been working in the prison library, helping other inmates learn to read. Last week, a woman named Maria read her first full book. The joy on her face made me understand what Mrs. Sullivan meant about service. 6 months after her release, I saw Alexandra at Providence Public Library. She was volunteering, helping an elderly man find books. Judge Caprio, I wanted to thank you for caring enough to break through my defenses, for showing me that real law requires heart. She gestured to the library. I work here 3 days a week. I'm taking the bar exam next month, but even if I pass, I'm going to keep volunteering. Because Mrs. Sullivan was right. Education should make you better, not colder. What kind of law do you want to practice? Victim advocacy, helping people who've been hurt, people like Mrs. Sullivan. Because the law isn't about winning arguments. It's about protecting people who need protection. Margaret Sullivan came to see me a year after the trial, walking with a cane now instead of a walker. Judge Caprio, Alexandra Morrison came to see me. She brought flowers and a letter, a real letter, not a legal document. She apologized without any case citations, just human words. What did you say? I told her I forgave her, that I'd already forgiven her. And I told her that her father did her a terrible disservice, but that it wasn't too late to reclaim her humanity. You showed her grace. Judge, I taught children for 40 years. I know the difference between someone who's bad and someone who's been badly taught. Alexandra wasn't evil. She was just lost. And sometimes the greatest service we can do is help someone find their way back to their own humanity. My father always told me, Frank, knowledge without wisdom is like a knife without a handle, dangerous to everyone who tries to use it. Alexandra Morrison learned that the hard way. She knew every legal term, every case citation, every procedural rule. But she didn't know how to say I'm sorry until she learned that being smart means nothing if you've lost your ability to feel for others. Her father, Jonathan Morrison, learned that teaching your children to never be vulnerable doesn't protect them, it destroys them. And Margaret Sullivan taught all of us that grace and forgiveness aren't signs of weakness, they're the highest form of strength. I'm Frank Caprio. Remember, the law is meant to serve justice, not hide from it. Real lawyers know the difference. Thanks for listening, and God bless.